The highest peaks were once thrones for living gods. Ancient people looked at mountains and saw not rock and ice, but divine beings. This is the world of sacred geography, a map where every landscape tells a story. Understanding this map is the key to seeing how our deepest myths are written into the earth itself. By the end of this journey, you will see the planet not as a collection of countries, but as a living tapestry of legends. We will uncover why cultures from Greece to Japan built their entire world view around a single mountain, and how myths of volcanic fire and celestial summits were used to explain the world and control its people. What forgotten power do you feel when you stand at the foot of a great mountain? That shadowy peak against the stars felt more alive than anything. It possessed a power our ancestors could feel in their bones, a presence that demanded recognition. This was not a choice, but a primal impulse, a universal human response to the overwhelming scale and permanence of the world's great heights. From the Andes to the Himalayas, cultures who never met each other all looked up and saw the same thing: gods in the rock. Why did this happen everywhere? It begins with a simple, powerful emotion: awe. A mountain is eternal. It watches generations come and go. It creates weather and commands the horizon. Our ancestors saw in it the very qualities they assigned to divinity: raw power and timelessness. This impulse was so powerful that scholars gave it a name: the axis mundi. Think of it as the world's navel, a central pole connecting everything. Heaven, earth, and the world below were all linked at this single sacred point. And what better pole than a mountain? It literally reaches for the sky. So many creation myths tell of a great flood, with one mountain peak piercing the waters to become the first dry land, the birthplace of a new world. For a community, claiming a local peak as their axis mundi was a revolutionary act. It meant they were not just living in a random valley, they were at the very center of the universe. Their rituals, their prayers, and their identity were anchored to this unmovable pillar. The intimidating wilderness was no longer a threat. It was a holy home, a cathedral of stone. This spiritual contract with the land was one of humanity's first steps toward building civilization itself. It gave people a place, both on the map and in the cosmos. That celestial palace of the gods, remote and untouchable, represented one kind of power, but another, more intimate power was found on the slopes themselves, in the brutal climb toward revelation. If the peak was a throne, the journey to it was a trial. This second function transformed the mountain into a sacred ladder, a place of pilgrimage and profound personal transformation. Think of Moses ascending the shrouded summit of Mount Sinai to receive the law directly from God. The mountain was the meeting point, the thin place where heaven and earth touched, and a single human could stand in the presence of the divine. This was not about observing a distant God in his home, but about seeking a direct encounter, an answer, a vision. Such a journey was never easy. It was designed as a test of spirit, will, and body. The thin air, the treacherous paths, the sheer physical exhaustion, all served a spiritual purpose. They stripped away the ordinary world, purging the pilgrim of their daily concerns and forcing a raw confrontation with the self and the sublime. In the Andes, pilgrims would undertake grueling climbs to high-altitude shrines, their labors an offering to the mountain deities known as apus. In Japan, followers of Shujendo would scale sacred peaks as a form of ascetic training, believing the ordeal purified the soul and granted mystical powers. The mountain itself became the teacher and the obstacle. Every slipping stone and gasping breath was part of the ritual. Reaching the summit was not about conquest, but about arrival at a new state of being. You did not climb to defeat the mountain, you climbed so that the mountain could remake you. This quest for revelation hints at something even more fundamental, a truth written not in scripture, but in the very rock and ice. The mountain was also a living library, and its geological language held the secrets of creation itself. But this spiritual ladder also served as a pillar for something larger than any single pilgrim. The same mountain that transformed individuals also anchored entire civilizations, weaving their history and identity directly into the stone. These peaks became vast libraries of memory, their very geology encoding the stories of a people. A volcano, for instance, is not a quiet god. Its eruptions are acts of terrifying power, and ancient cultures had to make sense of this violence. For them, the mountain was not just a place where gods lived, it was a god itself, and its fiery temper needed an explanation. This is where myth becomes a tool for understanding the natural world. The Hawaiian goddess Pele, for example, is the volatile deity of Kilauea volcano. Her legendary fits of jealousy and her battles with her sister, the goddess of the sea, were not just entertaining stories. They were a precise mythological map of the very real geological conflict between volcanic lava flows and the ocean. When the people saw steam rising where lava met water, they understood it as Pele fighting her sister. The myth gave them a framework to comprehend and speak about the terrifying, unpredictable force that shaped their lives and their land. This narrative tamed the chaos, turning a random natural disaster into a story with motives and emotions that a human mind could grasp. It was a way of mapping the unknown, of drawing a face on the formless power of the earth. And this process of mapping the sacred was not left to chance. It was meticulously planned and physically constructed, turning the entire landscape into a celestial mirror. This geological language of fire and water was a powerful form of storytelling, yet another function of the sacred mountain was even more personal. It became a pillar of memory and cultural identity, an immutable witness to a people's entire history. For the Maori of New Zealand, the majestic peak Taranaki is not merely a landform. He is an ancestor, a being with a heart and a history. Their stories tell of a legendary battle where Taranaki fought the mountain Tongariro for the love of the beautiful Pehanga. Defeated and heartbroken, Taranaki fled to the coast, his tears carving the deep Wanganui River as he traveled. This is not just a charming tale. It is a profound myth that etches social relationships, emotional conflicts, and territorial claims directly onto the landscape. Every time a Maori person looks at that mountain, they see a chapter of their family history written in stone. Across the sea, the immense red monolith of Uluru in Australia serves a similar, profound purpose for the Anangu people. This is not a rock to them. It is the central text of their creation narrative, the Tijukurpa, or dream time. Every crevice, every cave, every unusual stain on its surface tells a specific part of the story. This one was formed by the spear of an ancestral being. That cave is where the lizard man rested. These were not mere tales for entertainment. They were living, breathing maps of law, kinship, and ecology. By knowing the stories of Uluru, an Anangu child knew which plants were safe to eat, where to find water, how to relate to neighboring groups, and the moral laws that governed their society. The mountain was a library, a legal document, and a sacred text all fused into one permanent record. It held the covenant between the people and the land, ensuring the transmission of this vital knowledge across countless generations long before the written word existed. This role as a memory keeper, a stone witness to the entire cycle of life, naturally connects these sacred peaks to humanity's deepest mystery, the threshold of death itself. That same stone library holding the stories of life also concealed a gateway to the world of the dead. While the summit reached for the heavens, the deep caves and volcanic vents of a mountain plunged into the chthonic realm, the underworld. This was the mountain's fourth, more shadowy function, a portal to powers far older and more primal than the celestial gods. The volcano, with its fiery breath spewing from the Earth's molten core, was the ultimate symbol of this subterranean force. For the Romans, Mount Etna was not just a mountain, it was the roaring forge of the god Vulcan, and according to some terrifying myths, the prison of the monstrous Typhon. His immense body was pinned beneath the mountain, and his agonized writhing deep below was what caused the ground to shake and the mountain to bellow with fire and ash. Here, the mountain was not a throne or a ladder, but a lid on a cosmic prison, a constant reminder of the chaotic forces straining just beneath the thin crust of the world. This connection to the world below was not always fearful. In Mesoamerica, the great volcano Popocatépetl was often seen as a warrior turned to stone, his fiery heart still burning for his lost love. His eruptions were not just random acts of violence, but the passionate, sorrowful displays of a being forever connected to the powers of life, death, and the land itself. This association created a profound link between mountains, fertility, and regeneration. The terrifying eruption that buried villages and darkened the sky would, in time, leave behind soil incredibly rich with minerals. The destruction brought by the Underworld's fire ultimately gave birth to new life, a cycle of death and rebirth that was perfectly mirrored in the myths. Even the quietest caves on a mountainside were seen as entrances to this otherworld. These were not just hollows in the rock. They were places of initiation where shamans would go to commune with ancestral spirits, or sacred tombs where the dead were laid to rest, their spirits returning to the earth through the same doorway. This dual nature is what made the mountain a complete cosmic symbol. It was the one place that truly connected everything, its peak brushing the heavens while its roots anchored deep in the underworld, embodying the entire, unending cycle of existence. This deep, physical connection to the cosmos was not left to faith alone. Ancient cultures took these beliefs and etched them directly into the earth, building vast landscapes that mirrored the heavens above. This belief in the mountain as a cosmic pillar was so powerful it began to shape cities and temples. The abstract idea of sacred geography gave rise to a precise and practical art, the art of aligning human life with the spiritual energy of the land. This is Geomancy, and it turned the entire landscape into a living, breathing entity with which humanity had to cooperate. The most famous system is Chinese Feng Shui, which translates as wind and water. Its practitioners were not just decorators, they were cosmic architects. They sought to channel the flow of Kai, the vital life force, by carefully positioning homes, tombs, and entire cities in relation to the land's spiritual anatomy. A primary rule was to site a building with its back protected by a spirit mountain, a symbolic black tortoise, while having lower hills to the front like a red phoenix. This embrace of the land was believed to gather benevolent energy, offering protection, health, and prosperity to the inhabitants. It was a way of building yourself into the mountain story, of securing your place within its protective aura. This profound understanding was not unique to China. High in the Andes, the Incas were masters of this sacred integration. They did not simply build on the land, they built with it. Look at Machu Picchu, that breathtaking city in the clouds. Its entire layout is a celestial map. Key structures are positioned so that on the solstices, the sun rises or sets in perfect alignment with the pinnacle of Huayna Picchu or other sacred peaks. The mountains were not a backdrop, they were active participants in the architecture, fixed points in a vast stone calendar. This was cosmic engineering on a grand scale, a deliberate effort to harmonize the rhythm of human society with the divine pulse of the natural world. By weaving their buildings into the sacred geography, these cultures believed they could ensure stability and invite the favor of the gods. This was a deep, intuitive form of ecological wisdom, a recognition that true human flourishing depended on a respectful partnership with the immense powers of the earth. It was a way of mapping the myth onto the dirt and rock of daily life. Mount Olympus pierced the sky not as a wild, untamed peak, but as a celestial acropolis. This was not just the home of the gods, it was the gleaming capital of the cosmos itself, a divine bureaucracy carved from cloud and stone. For the ancient Greeks, the mountain's physical location was profoundly strategic, perched on the border between Thessaly and Macedonia. It stood as a neutral, unassailable territory, high above the constant political rivalries of the mortal city-states below. The very structure of its divine society mirrored this ordered vision. The 12 Olympians formed a pantheon of specialized ministers, each governing a specific aspect of existence. Poseidon commanded the seas, Athena oversaw wisdom and warfare, and Aphrodite presided over love. This was a cosmic reflection of the increasingly complex and specialized political systems emerging in human society. The myths that swirled around its cloud-shrouded summit were far more than simple stories. They were the operating system of the universe, allegories that explained everything from the terrifying power of a thunderstorm, seen as the wrath of Zeus, to the melancholic cycle of the seasons, born from the story of Hades and Persephone. The mountain's greatest power, however, lay in its sheer inaccessibility. No mortal was permitted to climb its slopes and live. This enforced separation was the core of Greek tragedy, a constant, visible reminder of the unbridgeable chasm between the human and the divine. The peak stood as a permanent symbol of the cosmic law that governed all things, a hierarchy as fixed and unchangeable as the mountain itself. Olympus demonstrates with perfect clarity how a single geological formation could be engineered into the administrative heart of an entire civilization's worldview. While Olympus stood as a divine fortress for one pantheon, another peak halfway across the world became a universal spiritual capital. Mount Kailash rises from the Tibetan plateau in near-perfect pyramidal symmetry, a solitary peak that feels less like a part of the landscape and more like a monument intentionally placed there. This one mountain is the heart of the world for 4 distinct religions, a phenomenon unmatched anywhere else on Earth. For Hindus, this is the celestial abode of Lord Shiva, the god of destruction and regeneration, who sits in eternal meditation upon its summit. For Buddhists, it is the home of Chakrasamvara, also known as Demchok, a Buddha who embodies the bliss of enlightened consciousness. Followers of Jainism revere it as Ashtapada, the sacred site where their first great teacher, Rishabhanatha, achieved liberation from the cycle of rebirth. And for the indigenous Bon faith, it is the soul of the entire region, the axis from which their founder descended from the heavens. These traditions tell vastly different stories, yet they converge on one profound truth. They all see Kailash as the axis mundi, the unmoving center of the cosmos. This shared belief has forged a remarkable rule: no one is permitted to climb to its summit. The sacred act is not ascent but circumambulation. Pilgrims undertake the Kora, a grueling 52-kilometer trek on foot around the mountain's base. This journey, often taken at high altitude where the air is thin, is a physical prayer. It can take several days, and completing it is believed to purify a lifetime of negative karma. The very shape of the mountain is seen as a divine signature. Its 4 sheer faces are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, and the pattern of glaciers cascading down its slopes naturally forms a shape resembling the ancient swastika, a symbol of auspiciousness and cosmic cycles in these Eastern traditions. Here, the mapping is not of a single myth but of a shared human longing. Kailash does not belong to one story. It provides a geological anchor for a universal spiritual yearning, a silent testament to the idea that the path to the center is not about conquest but about reverence. This interfaith axis stands in quiet contrast to the singular narratives of other sacred peaks. pointing toward a deeper unity written not in scripture but in stone. The story of Pele is a living map of fire. Her body is the very rock of Hawaii, her moods the tremors that shake the ground, and her breath the plumes of steam rising from the Kilauea caldera. Unlike the remote gods of Olympus, Pele is not a distant ruler. She is the land itself, a being of raw, untamed emotion. Her primary home is the Hailmayumau crater, a vast, steaming pit at the volcano's summit that was traditionally seen as her sacred fireplace. But she is a restless deity. Ancient Hawaiian chants are not just poems, they are detailed migration records, tracing her journey from the northwestern islands all the way to the big island of Hawaii. Each volcanic feature she left behind, from a cinder cone to a vast lava field, marks a chapter in her epic story of conflict and search for a home. This narrative was the island's first geological survey. The constant struggle between Pele and her sister, the sea goddess Namakea, perfectly mirrors the violent, physical interaction of lava and ocean. When a flow of Pele's molten rock met the sea, the explosive steam and the formation of new, rugged land were understood as the latest battle in their eternal family feud. This myth gave a terrifyingly unpredictable natural process a human-scale logic. It was a way to comprehend the incomprehensible. The people learned to read the signs of her anger or her contentment in the swelling of the ground, the change in the color of the smoke, or the behavior of the local wildlife. This knowledge was a matter of survival. It dictated where it was safe to build a village and for how long, when to present offerings of sacred berries, flowers, and pigs to appease her, and when to retreat to higher ground. Even the smallest volcanic fragments held her essence. The delicate, golden strands of volcanic glass we call Pele's hair are not just geological curiosities. In this worldview, they are literally strands of the goddess's own hair, left behind as she traveled. This is animism in its purest form, a belief that sees the entire world as imbued with a conscious, divine spirit. The mountain is not just a home for a god, it is the god. To stand near its flowing lava is to stand in the presence of a living, breathing, and feeling geography. This deep, personal connection to a volatile earth stands in stark contrast to another sacred peak, one whose story is written not in fire, but in the silent, enduring ice of the far north. This symbolic language was not confined to mountains alone. Entire landscapes were read as a living, breathing text, every feature imbued with a sacred meaning that guided both footsteps and faith. Rivers were more than just water. They were life-giving deities like the Ganges, descending from the heavens to purify the soul, or they served as stark boundary markers between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. A raging torrent was a powerful, willful god, while a still, deep lake was a reflective and mysterious portal. Forests were not simply collections of trees. They were realms of deep mystery and primal danger, home to wild spirits, trickster gods, and the secluded huts of wise hermits seeking transformation away from society. Deserts, in their vast and empty silence, were understood as places of ultimate purification and divine encounter. The biblical stories of the Israelites wandering for 40 years were not just a historical account, but a powerful metaphor for this spiritual stripping away, where the harsh emptiness of the sand and sun forced a direct confrontation with the divine. This symbolic coding was never arbitrary. It was a brilliant system built on direct, careful observation of the land's own character and behavior. A culture living by a violent, flooding river would naturally see it as a temperamental god that needed appeasement. A community relying on a tranquil spring would revere it as a benevolent, nurturing spirit. By mapping their myths onto these features, they created a sophisticated mnemonic system for navigating and surviving their world. A traveler would know that a certain mountain pass was the very place where a legendary hero defeated a monstrous beast, and would therefore pass through with caution and respect. They would know that a particular grove of trees was where a goddess bathed, making it a site for quiet reflection and offerings, not for hunting or logging. This practice wove a dense, invisible web of meaning over the entire terrain. Every journey became a walking recitation of sacred history, a physical engagement with the stories that defined a people. It was a profound way of domesticating the intimidating wilderness, not by cutting it down or fencing it off, but by saturating it with narrative. A random, frightening forest became the enchanted wood of a known myth. A barren desert became the testing ground of prophets. The physical space was thus transformed into a place, a location rich with cultural memory and spiritual significance. To understand this ancient code is to finally learn how to read the very first maps humanity ever drew, not on parchment, but directly onto the soul of the land itself. A violent storm was not just a shift in atmospheric pressure, it was the rage of a sky god. The sudden, inexplicable failure of a spring was the sorrow of a water spirit. For our ancestors, the entire world was a stage for a continuous, divine performance, and sacred geography provided the script. This was the ultimate purpose of myth as explanation. Before the language of tectonic plates and weather systems, humanity used the language of stories to answer the most pressing questions of existence. These narratives were not flights of fancy, but a deeply logical and essential system for survival. When the ground shook and a mountain roared with fire, the people did not see random geology. They saw the fiery temper of Peel, a being whose emotions they understood. Her anger had a cause, perhaps a broken taboo or a forgotten offering, and if her anger had a cause, then it might also have a cure. This was a revolutionary idea. It transformed a terrifying, uncontrollable natural disaster into a manageable social problem. The solution was not to flee blindly, but to perform the correct ritual, to restore balance through ceremony and respect. This mythological framework gave people a crucial sense of agency in a world that often seemed brutally arbitrary. The same logic applied to the daily journey of the sun. In Egypt, the sun god Ra was believed to sail his bark across the sky each day, descending into the underworld each night to battle the serpent of chaos, Apophis, only to be reborn at dawn. This was not just a beautiful story, it was a cosmological model that explained the sun's reliable cycle and the constant, unseen struggle between order and chaos that underpinned reality itself. An echo in a canyon was not an acoustic reflection. It was the voice of a nymph, a reminder that every feature of the landscape was conscious and responsive. This personalized science created a world that was intensely relational. The mountain was not an object, it was a person. The river was a living ancestor. This perspective fostered a profound form of ecological wisdom. If the forest is the home of a powerful spirit, you do not cut it down carelessly. If the river is a goddess, you do not pollute her waters. The myths encoded practical, sustainable living practices within a sacred context. They answered the why with a story long before science could explain the how with data. This narrative map provided the ultimate psychological comfort, ensuring that no matter how chaotic the world seemed, it all made sense within the grand, dramatic, and deeply human story written across the sacred land. That sacred connection between a people and their mountain was a profound source of identity, but it was also a resource that could be harnessed and controlled. The designation of a site as holy was never purely a spiritual matter. It was one of humanity's most potent tools for building and legitimizing political power. A king or a priestly class that could claim a unique, exclusive connection to a powerful sacred site held the ultimate key to their authority. They became the gatekeepers of the divine. By controlling who could access the holy mountain, by regulating the rituals performed there, and by positioning themselves as the sole interpreters of its oracles, elites could consolidate their rule over the entire population. Consider the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This was not merely a religious shrine. For centuries, it functioned as a major political force, a kind of ancient think tank and intelligence agency rolled into one. Kings, generals, and founders of new colonies would bring their most critical questions to the Pythia, the priestess who delivered the god Apollo's often ambiguous pronouncements. Her cryptic answers could launch 1,000 ships, halt an invasion, or legitimize a new code of laws. The power to interpret that divine ambiguity was a power that shaped the destiny of the Mediterranean world. This control over sacred narrative was made even more explicit in ancient Egypt. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was an artificial mountain, a colossal ramp designed to project the pharaoh's soul directly to the imperishable stars. By building his eternal residence in the form of the most sacred of geographical features, the pharaoh was making a permanent, unassailable claim. His earthly rule was not just approved by the gods, it was a direct extension of the cosmic order itself. To challenge the king was to challenge the fundamental structure of the universe. This political dimension forces us to see sacred geography not just as a map of belief, but as a map of power structures, a landscape that was constantly contested. Different groups, different dynasties would often vie to control the narrative of a holy site, because whoever owned the story owned the authority that flowed from it. The mapping of myth was therefore always a deliberate act of social engineering. This universal need for a center reveals a profound human truth. Every culture, in its own way, insisted it was living at the very heart of the world. The Norse envisioned the immense ash tree Yggdrasil, its roots drinking from primordial wells and its branches holding the 9 realms. Siberian shamans spoke of a cosmic pole they would spiritually climb to journey between worlds. For Aboriginal Australians, the axis was often a ceremonial pole, a focal point for rituals that connected the dreamtime to the present. Yet the most common and tangible symbol of this world center was always the mountain. It served as the central pillar from which the 4 cardinal directions emanated, a fixed point of orientation in a vast and often disorienting cosmos. This was the one place where the barriers between realms grew thin, where a shaman's prayer or a hero's quest could bridge the divide between heaven, earth, and the underworld. How could so many cultures all claim their own mountain was the one true center? The beautiful answer is that they were all correct. The concept of the axis mundi is inherently pluralistic. It is not about a single, objective location, but about the psychological and spiritual act of centering. A village's local hill, if it was the focus of their rituals and stories, was every bit as much a world axis as the Grand Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a site revered as the cosmic center by 3 of the world's great faiths. This was not a geographical competition, it was a cosmological agreement. By designating their own sacred site as the navel of the world, no matter how small their community, people could see themselves as living at the very heart of creation. Their lives were not random or marginal. They were positioned at the central crossroads of the universe, directly connected to the divine. This universal impulse points to something essential in the human spirit, a deep, non-negotiable need to find meaning by locating ourselves at the center of our own story, and by mapping that story onto the very ground beneath our feet. Yet that ancient map of power and pilgrimage did not simply vanish with the arrival of the modern age. We may no longer see a divine smith in a volcano's fire, but the deep human impulse to find meaning in the landscape has not disappeared. It has transformed. Today, we often approach a mountain not as a throne for a god, but as a challenge for our own ambition. We speak of conquering a peak, of planting a flag at the summit as a testament to human will. The sacred journey of the pilgrim has, in many cases, been replaced by the personal achievement of the climber. We map these places with satellite imagery and geological surveys, seeing them as collections of rock and ice rather than conscious beings. This is the secularization of the landscape. where the old myths have been quieted by the powerful voice of scientific explanation. But listen closely, and you can still hear the echo of the axis mundi. Our national parks are not just protected lands. We call them cathedrals of nature, and when we walk through a redwood grove or stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon, the experience is often described in profoundly spiritual terms. It is a feeling of awe, of humility, of connection to something far greater than oneself. This is not a formal religion, but it is a form of reverence. The environmental movement itself draws upon this ancient language, arguing that these wild places have an intrinsic, sacred value that goes beyond any economic use. We are fighting to protect them not just for resources, but for their own sake, for their spiritual significance to the human soul. This is a powerful resacralization of the land, a new mapping of the sacred using the vocabulary of ecology and preservation. The enduring popularity of ancient pilgrimage routes like the Camino de Santiago offers even more direct evidence. Thousands of people each year still choose to walk for weeks across a meaningful landscape, seeking transformation through physical hardship and the rhythm of the journey. They may not all be devout Catholics seeking relics. Many are searching for clarity, for healing, or for a sense of purpose, using the old paths for new kinds of quests. We may not believe a storm is the wrath of Zeus, but we still feel a primal thrill watching lightning crackle over a desert mesa. The map was never erased. We simply learn to read it in a new light, proving that our need to find the transcendent in the terrestrial is a permanent feature of the human spirit. But that deep, ancestral bond between a people and their sacred land was not destined to remain undisturbed. The arrival of colonial powers brought with it a fundamentally different way of seeing the world, one that viewed these ancient maps not as profound wisdom, but as primitive superstition. European explorers and settlers arrived armed with sextants and Bibles, with a cartographic tradition that sought to measure and claim, not to listen and relate. They looked upon a mountain that a culture had revered for millennia as a living ancestor, and saw only a resource, an obstacle, or a landmark to be renamed in honor of a distant king or a foreign saint. This act of renaming was far more than a bureaucratic formality. It was a deliberate act of spiritual dispossession. By erasing the indigenous name, they sought to sever the sacred connection, to silence the story that had given that place its meaning and power for generations. The official maps drawn by the new rulers showed empty spaces or new names, creating a geography of silence where a chorus of stories had once thrived. This was not merely a cultural insult, it was a direct attack on the very foundation of indigenous identity and stewardship. If the mountain was no longer sacred, then the people who revered it had no special claim to it. Their entire worldview, which was woven into the landscape, was suddenly declared invalid. The land was stripped of its soul and reduced to mere property, ready to be divided, sold, and exploited. Consider the Black Hills of South Dakota. To the Lakota people, this range is Pahasopa, the heart of everything that is. It is the sacred center of their world, a place of creation and ceremony. But with the discovery of gold, this spiritual heart was brutally carved open. The land was seized by the United States government in a blatant violation of treaties, leading to over a century of conflict and the profound grief of the Lakota people, who were forcibly separated from the very core of their existence. This pattern repeated itself across the globe. In Australia, sacred sites of the Aboriginal peoples were desecrated or paved over. In Africa, mountains central to local cosmology were claimed for mining. This forced separation caused a trauma that echoes through generations, a spiritual wound inflicted by the destruction of a people's sacred map. To understand sacred geography today is to recognize that these landscapes are not just sites of ancient belief. They are active, living centers of meaning that have been, and continue to be, the focus of political struggle and violent contest. The question of who gets to name a mountain, who gets to tell its story, is ultimately a question of who holds the power to define reality itself. These ancient stories were once dismissed as pure fantasy, the inventions of poets and priests. But what happens when a shovel strikes the earth and uncovers a truth that echoes the old tales? Archaeology has repeatedly bridged the chasm between myth and material reality, offering tantalizing clues that our ancestors were often remembering, not just imagining. Take the legendary labyrinth of King Minos on Crete, home to the fearsome Minotaur. For centuries, this was the ultimate monster story. Then, archaeologists began excavating the vast palace of Knossos. They uncovered a complex, multi-leveled structure with a bewildering maze of corridors, storage magazines, and courtyards. No half-man, half-bull skeleton was found, but the sheer, disorienting scale of the palace was a labyrinth in its own right. The myth appears to have preserved a powerful cultural memory of a place so immense and confusing it could only be explained as a supernatural prison. An even more dramatic validation came from the plains of Hisarlik in Turkey. For generations, scholars believed Homer's Iliad was a beautiful work of fiction, his grand city of Troy a poetic set piece. Then the determined Heinrich Schliemann began digging. He discovered not just one city, but multiple layers of them, built one upon the other. He found evidence of massive walls, of siege, and of immense wealth in golden artifacts. A city that matched Homer's description in both location and grandeur had indeed existed. The epic was not mere invention, it was a magnified echo of a real, bloody conflict. This same convergence of story and stone applies directly to our sacred mountains. High in the Andes, on the icy, windswept peaks the Incas called Apus, archaeologists have made chilling discoveries. They have found the frozen, perfectly preserved bodies of children and young women, sacrificed in a ritual known as Capacocha. These were not acts of cruelty, but the ultimate offerings to the mountain gods. The chosen children, often from noble families, were treated as sacred ambassadors, given chicha beer and coca leaves, and then left to forever inhabit the summit. The physical evidence of these high-altitude shrines, with their elaborate gold and silver figurines and precious textiles, provides undeniable proof. It shows the extreme, tangible lengths an entire civilization would go to honor the divine power they saw embodied in the mountain. These discoveries do not prove that a minotaur stalked the halls of Knossos or that the Apus were conscious deities. Instead, they reveal something perhaps more profound. They show that our deepest myths are rarely born in a vacuum. They are often rooted in real places, traumatic events, and profound cultural practices. The story was the vessel that carried the memory long after the palace fell or the ritual ceased. Archaeology gives that vessel a solid foundation, allowing us to touch the very stones that first inspired the legends, adding a crucial layer of historical depth to our map of the sacred. Carl Jung would see these stone giants as mirrors of the mind. The Swiss psychiatrist proposed that the sacred mountain is far more than a cultural echo. It is a powerful archetype, a universal symbol emerging from what he called the collective unconscious. This is not a personal memory bank, but a deep, inherited layer of the human psyche shared by everyone, a wellspring of primordial images and patterns that shape our dreams, our stories, and our deepest understandings. Within this shared psychic soil, the mountain stands as one of the most potent of these symbols. It represents the self, not the small, everyday ego, but the complete, integrated, and transcendent core of our entire personality. Think of it as the ultimate version of who you are meant to become. The long, difficult climb up the sacred slope is not just a physical pilgrimage. It is a perfect metaphor for the psychological journey of individuation. This is the often grueling process of confronting your own shadows, integrating your conflicting parts, and moving toward a state of wholeness and self-realization. Every slippery rock and moment of doubt on that mountainside mirrors an inner struggle, a fear to be faced or a hidden aspect of your own nature to be acknowledged. The summit, that breathtaking point of clear air and vast perspective, symbolizes the achievement of this goal. It is a state of psychological clarity where the conflicts below finally make sense, where you see your life not as a series of disjointed events, but as a unified landscape. This framework explains the undeniable power of mountain imagery in places far removed from any temple. When a hero in a film climbs a peak to gain wisdom, or when a character in a novel has a dream of standing on a high ridge, these are not random creative choices. They are tapping directly into this ancient archetype. Our profound attraction to these geological wonders, the awe we feel even looking at a photograph, is not just an appreciation for natural beauty. It is a psychic resonance. We are drawn to mountains because on some level deeper than language or culture, we recognize them. They are the built-in, pre-loaded maps of our own inner world, a silent, eternal guide for the most important journey any of us will ever take, the journey home to ourselves. Joseph Campbell saw this same psychic map echoed in the stories of every culture. He called it the monomyth, the single great story of the hero's journey, and the sacred mountain stands at its very heart. It is the world navel, the place of the ultimate boon, the impossible treasure that the hero must risk everything to obtain. This is not a random setting. The mountain provides the perfect, universal stage for the central ordeal, the climb that forges a new self. Think of Jason and his Argonauts sailing to the ends of the known world not for a mere golden fleece, but for the very symbol of kingship and divine right, often depicted as hanging from a tree on a sacred mountain. Or consider the Buddha, who did not simply sit under any tree. The Bodhi tree is his axis mundi, the fixed point at the center of the universe where he faced his final, greatest temptations and achieved enlightenment, becoming the awakened one. In these stories, the mountain is more than a backdrop. It is an active character in the drama, the teacher and the trial combined. The hero must leave the comforts of the ordinary world and answer a call to adventure that leads them inexorably upward. The path is always treacherous, a series of tests designed to break down the old self. The thin air, the sheer cliffs, the blinding storms, these are the physical manifestations of doubt, fear, and the ego's resistance. At the summit, the hero does not just find a treasure chest. They confront a powerful guardian, a dragon, a god, or their own darkest reflection. This confrontation is the climax, the moment where the old self dies and a new understanding is born. The boon they seize is never just a physical object. It is the elixir of life, the secret of fire, the law for a new people, a profound wisdom that can heal their broken world. But the journey is not complete until the hero makes the difficult return, descending from that sublime height to bring the gift back to the community below. This is the final, crucial stage of the monomyth, the sharing of the wisdom. The hero who stays on the mountain is lost, their transformation meaningless. They must come back down to earth and integrate their hard-won knowledge into the fabric of daily life. From the Greek peaks of Parnassus to the mythical Mount Meru of Hindu cosmology, the same structure appears again and again. The specific names of the gods and the details of the trials change, but the fundamental architecture of the story, with the mountain as its central pillar, remains breathtakingly consistent. This reveals a stunning truth about humanity. Our most cherished stories of transformation, our deepest myths of becoming, are all built upon the same sacred geography, written not just on the land, but into the very blueprint of the human soul. Long after the temples fell silent, the sacred map found new life in the hands of artists and poets. They became the new cartographers of the soul, translating the old, intuitive language of the land into paint and verse. In the mist-shrouded peaks of classical Chinese Shan Shui paintings, we see this translation in its most refined form. These are not literal portraits of mountains. They are spiritual diagrams, the winding paths leading into the clouds, the solitary huts perched on impossible cliffs, the waterfalls vanishing into vapor. All of it is a deliberate composition. It maps a philosophical journey, inviting the viewer to wander visually into the dwelling places of the immortals, to seek wisdom in the lofty, quiet spaces far above the mundane world. This was not a depiction of nature, but an evocation of a sacred inner state, using the mountain as its universal symbol. Centuries later and a world away, the Romantic poets performed a similar act of resacralization. They looked upon the Alps not with fear, but with a rapturous awe they called the sublime. For William Wordsworth, a mountain was a direct manifestation of God's power, a presence that could overwhelm the rational mind and stir the spirit to its very depths. Percy Bysshe Shelley, gazing upon Mont Blanc, saw in its glaciers and precipices a kind of terrible, beautiful mind, a force of pure, immoral eternity. The Romantics were reacting against the cold mechanics of the industrial age, and they found in the untamed mountain a perfect antidote, a cathedral of nature that could inspire the same reverence as any scripture. This artistic lineage did not end with poetry. The 20th century found its great mythmaker in J.R.R. Tolkien, a man who was himself a scholar of ancient languages and legends. He did not merely set his stories near mountains, he made the mountains characters. The Ents of his Middle-earth are, in a sense, walking, talking mountains, ancient shepherds of the forest whose slow, deep thoughts are as measured as geological time. And at the heart of The Hobbit stands the lonely mountain, Erebor. It is not just a setting, it is the entire goal, a lost dwarven homeland fusing the concepts of sacred axis and ancestral memory. The quest to reclaim it from the dragon smog is a hero's journey in its purest form, a pilgrimage back to the heart of the world to restore a broken kingdom. This tradition continues to pulse through our modern myths. The film Avatar presents us with an entire world, Pandora, where sacred geography is not a metaphor but a biological and neurological fact. The floating Hallelujah Mountains are not just beautiful, they are part of a global neural network, and the central tree of souls is the literal axis mundi for the Navi people. The story's conflict arises from a culture that lives within this sacred map clashing with one that sees only resources to be extracted. Through every medium, from ancient scrolls to digital cinema, these artistic representations serve a vital function. They are the vessels carrying the archetypal symbols across generations. They ensure that the mountain's power as a place of mystery, challenge, and transcendence never fades from our collective imagination, continually reminding us of the profound maps we once knew by heart. These ancient maps of the sacred are now being decoded with tools their creators could never have dreamed of. High above the earth, satellites capture images that strip away the forest canopy, while aircraft equipped with LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, fire millions of laser pulses toward the ground. This technology creates a fantastically detailed three-dimensional map of the surface, revealing what the human eye simply cannot see. In the dense jungles of Cambodia, this has exposed vast, sprawling cities around Angkor Wat, cities that were completely swallowed by the jungle and lost to history. We can now see how its central temple mountain was deliberately placed within a much larger, meticulously planned sacred geography, a spiritual metropolis aligned with the cosmos. In Peru, researchers flying LiDAR over the Nazca Desert have discovered that the famous lines, those giant geoglyphs of spiders and hummingbirds, do not exist in isolation. The lines often run straight from the plain directly up the sides of surrounding foothills, turning the entire terrain into a single, massive ceremonial complex. The drawings on the flat desert were only one part of a grander design that integrated the mountains themselves into the ritual landscape. This is not just finding new sites, it is understanding the profound connections between them. We can now demonstrate with mathematical certainty how the doorway of a Maya pyramid frames the exact point on the horizon where the sun rises on the winter solstice, cresting the peak of a specific, revered mountain. Digital reconstructions can take us even further. Software can roll back the clock, simulating the precise position of stars as they would have appeared over a stone circle 5,000 years ago. We can stand virtually inside a reconstructed mountain shrine and watch as the moon, on one special night each year, shines its light directly down the entrance passage to illuminate a sacred chamber. This technological remapping does not strip the magic from these places. If anything, it adds a new layer of wonder. It reveals that the myths were not just stories, but a sophisticated scientific language. The alignment was not a lucky guess, it was precise engineering. The mountain was not just a symbol, it was a fixed point in a giant, open-air observatory. These tools are giving us a pair of glasses to finally read the fine print on the world's oldest maps, and the text is written in the language of astronomy, geometry, and a deep, intimate conversation with the living earth. This ancient pull toward the sacred path has not faded with time, it has simply found new trails to walk. A global resurgence of pilgrimage is underway, with millions each year trading their daily routines for the dust of the Camino de Santiago, the circumambulation of Mount Kailash, or the profound unity of the Hajj in Mecca. The destinations span faiths and continents, from the purifying waters of the Ganges to the volcanic slopes of Mount Shasta, yet the underlying yearning is strikingly familiar. What calls people to these journeys in our hyper-connected modern world? For many, it is a conscious search for meaning, a deliberate break from the relentless pace of consumer society. The pilgrimage offers a structured escape, a container for transformation built from physical exertion and radical simplicity. Life on the road is reduced to its most essential elements, where a comfortable bed, a warm meal, and a dry path become profound blessings. This stripping away of complexity mirrors the ancient ascetics' climb, purging the distractions of modern life to create space for something deeper to emerge. The shared purpose among travelers, the unspoken bond with strangers all heading in the same direction, recreates the communal spirit of those ancient processions moving toward a sacred peak. Even journeys without an overtly religious goal often take on this sacred quality. The long trek to Mount Everest Base Camp, for instance, is not a ritual for a mountain god, yet those who undertake it frequently describe it in the language of pilgrimage. The grueling days, the breathtaking vistas, and the quiet camaraderie force a perspective shift. The small anxieties of everyday life seem to shrink against the immense, timeless scale of the Himalayas. The goal becomes internal, a test of spirit and a search for a clearer understanding of one's own place in the world. This enduring allure proves that our need for sacred geography is a permanent thread in the human fabric. We continue to be drawn to powerful places that command us to slow down, to walk, to breathe, and to remember what truly matters. The old maps of myth are still very much in use, their paths now leading as often to personal enlightenment as to the throne of a specific god. That profound yearning to walk a sacred path now collides with a modern dilemma. Our footsteps, however well-intentioned, can leave a deep and damaging imprint. The global resurgence of interest in these holy sites has created a complex ethical landscape where spiritual seeking, mass tourism, and fragile ecosystems intersect. An ancient pilgrimage route can become a crowded trail littered with plastic bottles. A silent meditation cave can echo with the chatter of a tour group. The very act of seeking transcendence can, paradoxically, contribute to the degradation of the place that makes it possible. This is the central conflict of sacred geography in the 21st century, a tension between the right to experience and the responsibility to preserve. Take the case of Mount Kailash. Its power as an axis mundi is intimately tied to its inaccessibility. The spiritual act is the kora, the circumambulation, a humble journey around its base. Allowing recreational climbers to scramble for its summit would be, for the traditions that revere it, a profound desecration, reducing a divine abode to a conquest. The mountain's sanctity is protected by that very prohibition. But what about other sites? In places like Sedona, Arizona, or Machu Picchu, the sheer volume of visitors strains the local infrastructure and damages the delicate environment. The land cannot sustain endless numbers. This forces us to ask a difficult question. Who truly has the right to access these places? Is it the global tourist armed with a camera and a bucket list? Or is it the indigenous community for whom the site is a living ancestor, the core of their cultural and spiritual identity? There is no simple answer, but a path forward exists through responsible tourism. This is not about staying home, but about changing how we travel. It begins with education, with taking the time to learn the stories of the land before we set foot on it. It means following local protocols, whether that involves removing our shoes, staying on marked paths, or refraining from photography during ceremonies. It requires a mindset shift where we see ourselves not as consumers of an experience, but as respectful guests in someone else's sacred home. We must minimize our physical impact, carrying out everything we carry in, and supporting local economies in a way that empowers rather than exploits. Navigating these ethical waters is an essential part of our modern relationship with the sacred. It asks us to listen more than we speak, to tread lightly, and to recognize that the deepest maps are not for taking but for honoring. Our modern world operates on a disenchanted map, one that charts resources to be extracted and land to be developed. This worldview has brought us to the brink of ecological collapse, a stark reminder that seeing the earth as a dead commodity is a spiritual and practical dead end. The ancient understanding of sacred geography offers a radical alternative. It presents a vision of the world not as a collection of objects, but as a community of subjects, a living, breathing, and deeply interconnected whole. This is not a plea to literally believe that a volcano is a goddess or a river is a god. It is an invitation to adopt a posture of reverence, a stance of profound respect for the intrinsic value of every mountain, forest, and watershed. The old myths were a technology for fostering responsibility and reciprocity. They taught that your actions had consequences in the eyes of the land itself. If you polluted a river, you offended the river spirit. If you clear-cut a forest, you displaced the forest guardians. This narrative framework enforced a sustainable relationship with the environment by making it a matter of sacred duty. We now need a new mythology for our time, one built not on capricious deities but on the verifiable truths of ecology. Imagine a story where the mountain is not the throne of a distant god, but the headwaters of a continent, its snowpack a sacred trust for millions downstream. Imagine a myth where the old-growth forest is not a timber reserve, but the planet's ancient lung, a library of genetic wisdom we are only beginning to read. This ecological mythology would remap the entire world as sacred. It would inspire us to see the protection of a wetland as a spiritual imperative, and the fight against climate change as the great heroic quest of our generation. The future of our planet may well depend on this act of re-enchantment. By learning to see the world as our ancestors did, not with their literal beliefs but with their deep relational wisdom, we might finally find the moral courage to become the stewards the earth so desperately needs. Our own survival is woven into this same tapestry. Our journey across the sacred geography of myth reveals that mountains were far more than physical landmarks. They were the central pillars upon which entire ancient worlds were built, serving as divine abodes and gateways to other realms. We have seen how myths rationalized the natural world, reinforced social orders, and gave voice to deep psychological archetypes. From the celestial fortress of Olympus to the universal heart of Kailash, from Peel's living volcanoes to the symbolic language of the entire landscape, these beliefs wove a rich tapestry of meaning directly over the earth itself. While the literal forms have changed, the core human impulses behind sacred geography remain with us. The feelings of awe, the search for meaning, and the deep need for a center and a connection endure in our national parks, our personal pilgrimages, and our most powerful art. The old maps are not obsolete. They invite us to look at our world with fresh eyes, to see the stories still embedded in the stones and recognize the soul in the summits. Let this exploration be a starting point for your own. Look at the landscape around you. What forgotten stories does it hold? Share your thoughts on a place that feels sacred to you in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our world.